Hi, it's Women's History Month and I look like a dog. Today we're talking about a mid-Victorian scandal and one of the first attempts ever to make trousers work as a female sort of garment in women's fashion. I don't know whether to use the word trousers or pants, so I'm just gonna use it whatever comes to my mind. So women did wear pants in Victorian era, but that was mostly for sports or heavy physical work or physical activities in general, or like assisting soldiers on the battlefield, so all was pretty much workwear. The year is 1851 and women's fashion pretty much sucks. I mean, it's really pretty, but at the same time it went really quickly from 1840s formal simplicity to like some really hardcore craziness. The bodices, as you can see, were really tight. The skirts, as you can't see, were really full, really long, and not very practical. And because wide bell-shaped skirts were really fashionable, women would just wear more and more petticoats to achieve the shape, and it got really heavy at some point and it was really bad. Overall, not great, but kind of terrible. So American women's rights activist Amelia Bloomer was writing about it in her newspaper The Lily for quite some time, but it didn't really catch on. Women were willing to suffer for fashion, to remain sort of like a social position, and not many were willing to experiment with practicality. So it all started with an article written by a man in a local newspaper. And it probably went something like this. Women, am I right? Always dressing ridiculous to the point where it's actually getting dangerous. Here is what I propose: Turkish-style pants and a short skirt covering the knee. So Bloomer noted that while this dude didn't necessarily agree with her views on women's rights, he did make some good points regarding women's fashion's practicality, or rather lack of it. I think it's really cool how she managed to find something interesting and valuable in an article written by a person who clearly had views opposite hers. So Amelia wrote a sort of a response article in her newspaper The Lily, where she kind of playfully wrote about the idea that he proposed. To which article he replied with another article, and he went like, "Girl, this ain't no joke." And Amelia then was like, "Yeah fam, I was just teasing you, I totally agree." So around the same time when the readers of The Lily and the guy's newspaper were kind of like observing the exchange of thought, getting really excited, Amelia's friend and a fellow feminist, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, had her friend over. And her friend, who is also called Elizabeth, walked around the town wearing something that looked kind of like what the guy described. It was a short skirt, it was a tunic with a short skirt and a pair of Turkish-style trousers. She's already been wearing it for a couple of months at this point, so the guy that proposed the outfit was not the only one that came up with this idea. And both her husband and her father, I think, approved of this, which is quite unique, I guess, when it comes to fashion revolutions. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who had this friend over, she was like, "Damn, it's a look." And she adopted the outfit shortly after. And that's when Amelia Bloomer saw it and she was like, "You know what? I'm gonna give it a try." So in 1851, she published another article in The Lily where she described how she adopted this new style and why she did it, and she explained everything. And she also included an illustration of her wearing the new dress, as it was called. And that's when the went down, because the readers got absolutely obsessed. The Lily was like a really small local newspaper that I think was delivered by mail, and it basically was sold in like 400 copies, and in that short amount of time it went to 4,000 copies. Everyone was writing to the editors asking about the new dress, asking for patterns, writing to Amelia Bloomer herself, trying to get some more information about it. Everyone was really excited about it. Well, at least women. And then the New York Tribune picked up on the craze and wrote a short article on it, and other newspapers started picking it up. And some newspapers praised the idea, others condemned it. It was kind of like a mixed reception. And what Bloomer was mostly upset about is that it tended to be named after her in the articles, whereas she didn't actually invent the dress. It was Elizabeth Miller's project, design. But mentions of like bloomerism and bloomer style and bloomer costume kind of flooded the newspapers, and it was already too late. But at the same time, she was quite happy about the popularity of the dress because that gave her a wider platform to educate women about women's rights. So the trend quickly spread to Europe and Australia even, and a lot of early feminists started wearing the costume, even to some women's rights conventions. It was sort of like the women's rights dress. And from that moment onwards, women were allowed to wear trousers freely and no one batted an eye. So, just kidding! The backlash was huge. People were kind of terrified, and the magazines were flooded with caricatures of women wearing trousers. They usually showed bloomer wearing women proposing to men, making them play the piano, smoking cigars, attending gentlemen clubs, neglecting their children, beating their husbands, drinking heavily, you know, generally speaking, doing what men used to do at the time. And actually a lot of women were afraid of the dress because they thought it kind of takes their femininity away. They didn't really like the idea of wearing something that was men's fashion. So they associated the outfit with some really radical ideas at the time, and they saw it as a threat to family life, family as an institution in general. That being said, if you've ever read online that women wearing the bloomer costume or the new dress were completely ridiculed, hated, spat on, disrespected, or that trouser-wearing women were not allowed to churches or public institutions, that is not entirely true. Bloomer herself said that despite the fact that she was the face of the fashion reform movement, and despite the fact that she traveled a lot and gave lectures, etc., she was never, not once, disrespected or frowned upon. Wherever she gave her lectures, was it town halls or churches, she was never ridiculed for her attire and always felt safe. She even noted that the press generally posted positive reviews of her lectures. So I guess if you think of the media scandals, they are usually blown out of proportion after they happen. Generally, people agreed with what she was saying about women's fashion. It's just that the new dress was too quirky maybe, and too, like, not fitting with what the idea of women's fashion was to gain wider popularity. But obviously some women were also pressured by their peers or parents or men in the family not to wear the dress. And that was the case for Amelia's friend, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So Amelia wore the outfit for several years until she went back to wearing more mainstream dresses. And that wasn't necessarily because she gave in or was continually harassed for wearing trousers, but she actually stopped wearing the dress for multiple reasons, which she all explained. Reason one, crinolines were patented in 1856, I believe. And that actually made wearing all those skirts so much easier because all of a sudden you didn't have to wear all those heavy petticoats, you relied only on this one light cage. Reason two, she moved to Iowa, and as she explained, it's really windy out there, and she ended up having the short skirts on her face or on her shoulders all the time. She didn't really like being exposed like that, so that was reason two. Reason three, she just sometimes felt like wearing something nice and feminine, which is okay even for a women's rights activist. And finally, she noticed that all the scandal and media tornado that was created around the dress is taking attention away from what she's actually fighting for. She wrote, and I'm gonna read this because I can't memorize it. We all felt that the dress was drawing attention from what we thought was of far greater importance. The question of women's right to better education, to a wider field of employment, to better remuneration, of her labor, and to the ballot for the protection of her rights. In the minds of some people, the short dress and women's rights were inseparably connected. With us, the dress was but an incident, and we were not willing to sacrifice greater questions to it. Amelia also noted that she kept wearing the costume because of the public outrage, kind of to show everyone that she will persist and wear the costume for as long as she likes. And so she did. She stopped wearing the costume not because someone asked her to, but exactly when she herself decided to do so. And so without the leader and without the media attention, the bloomer costume sort of died out. Also with the invention of crinolines, which, as I said, contrary to the popular belief, actually made it easier for women, there wasn't really a need anymore for such drastic changes. That being said, the topic of women's fashion reform and the involvement of trousers in women's everyday fashion lived on until the end of the century and even longer than that. What happened to Amelia Bloomer? She just went on with her life and continued her work. Here is her really cool reply to a feisty sermon given by some priest in which he argued that it is said in the Bible that a woman cannot adapt men's clothing. Here is what she said, and I think it's really cool. The first fashion we have any record of was set by Adam and Eve, and we are not told that there was any difference in the styles worn by them. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. We are led to suppose that they were just alike. The second fashion was made by God himself, and it would be supposed that if he intended the sexes to be distinguished by their garments, explicit direction would have been given as to the style of each. Unto Adam, and also unto his wife, did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothe them. Not a word as to any difference in the cut and the makeup of the coats. No command to her that she must swathe and cripple herself in long, tight, heavy, draggling skirts, while he dons the more comfortable, healthy, bifurcated garment. So generally speaking, she was quite outspoken for her time. Too long, didn't watch. Amelia Bloomer was pretty cool, but people were still afraid of trousers. And my hair is falling apart. See you soon! Wear your trousers today and thank Amelia Bloomer for that.